The Florida Gators offensive line will dictate their success in 2025.
You are Locked On Gators, your daily podcast on the Florida Gators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Locked On Gators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day. Every day we are available daily and free wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube. Happy Friday. I am Brandon Olsen. The Florida Gators play basketball tonight. We'll go live after that. Find me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Find all my written work with New York Giants on SI. Today's episode of Locked On Gators is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And today we are talking about the Florida Gators offensive line. And I'm saying this because I wanted to make it abundantly clear where I'm landing on this of the Florida Gators offensive line will dictate their success in 2025. And I know that a lot of people, myself included, feel good about where offensive line development is right now. You know, Austin Barber took big strides. I'm a huge fan of the hire of Jonathan DeCoster last year. I think that the way he teaches technically and how he operates technically is very similar to how some of the top offensive lines some of the offensive lines in college football and the NFL operate. He's from Callahan coaching tree, coaches the Scott Peters way. He coaches the way the best offensive line coaches coach. Pretty fun to see, right? But the Florida Gators offensive line in 2024 was decent to above average, okay? Personally, I think they're closer to the decent side. And if you disagree, I do have a rebuttal for it. We'll get to it in a second. And also, someone left a comment the other day that was like, oh, like the reason I like this show is because it's a sports guy talking sports. And thank you. That's what I love doing. In 2024, the Florida Gators offensive line allowed 120 pressures. Okay. That was the least in the Billy Napier tenure. However, it was also the fewest dropbacks, 389 dropbacks in 2024. And by dropbacks, that means anytime the quarterback dropped back, whether he threw it away, got sacked, scrambled, or actually threw the ball. 389 dropbacks in 2024. The second fewest was 424 in 2022, the Anthony Richardson year, right? The pressure percentage, though, that's where percentages are really helpful. The pressure percentage for Florida was 30.85%. So 30.85% in 2024, slightly up from the 30.04% in 2023. Again, that means that on a per drop back basis, more pressures in 2024 than in 2023. Which is interesting considering I feel like a lot of the narrative was around how the pressure wasn't as bad in 2024. That's where quarterback play comes into effect, okay? Graham Mertz is not a bad quarterback, but Graham Mertz is a quarterback that couldn't escape pressure. And so pressures were more impactful in 2023 than they were in 2024, right? If you have a quarterback that can't escape pressure, he's going to take more hits, take more sacks, less extending the play and making a play, which DJ Lagway did a lot of in 2024. So in 2024, the pressure percentage was 30.85%, up from 30.04%. And the average amongst qualified passers in college football was 29%. So Florida allowed more pressures than an average offensive line. The median was 28.37%. So Florida allowed more pressures than the median of 28.37%. So Florida's offensive line performed like an average pass blocking offensive line. Okay. Average. Again, that's where quarterback play really makes a difference as far as how many sacks you took and what the difference is there. But Florida's offensive line there, average there. So for those of you that say the offensive line performed better, that's the quarterback difference there, right? For those of you that are pushing that one. If the offensive line was better, but the pressure percentage was up, that's a quarterback problem at that point, right? That's why I told you, hey, if you have a rebuttal on the offensive line thing, I have a rebuttal. which is that if you think the offensive line was playing better and was playing above the average, then guess what? Their pressures percentage say different, which means someone has to be responsible for that pressure, which means that it has to be the quarterback responsible for the pressure then. So you decide who you want to throw that blame on to. Rushing wise, Florida had 5.19 yards per carry last year, right? 65.86% of those yards came after contact. Okay. Average rushing yards for across qualified rushers was 5.55 rushing yards. That's across college football. 5.55 rushing yards. So they averaged more rushing yards per carry. However, 66.13% of those yards came after contact. So Florida, while they averaged fewer yards per carry, and I mean designed carries. I'm not talking about when quarterbacks get sacked. I mean designed carries. I'm not talking about scrambles. I'm talking about designed carries. Florida averaged 5.19 yards per designed carry in 2024, which is 0.36 yards per carry less than the average, but less of Florida's yards came after contact, which means that as far as run blocking, the offensive line was at least getting these guys a fresher release than across the country. And for line yardage, Florida was 14th percentile. Okay. That means basically how much of the yards were responsible for the offense, or how much of the yards were the offensive lines doing. Their actual success there, 14th percentile nationally. That's what we're talking about. And I'm not saying that the offensive line was horrible. My point is just that the offensive line was decent to above average. And again, like I said, I err more on the decent side. Like if we're talking about everything's a spectrum, right? If we're talking about the spectrum from awful to elite, I'll set it so it's in the camera. If it's awful to elite, decent's basically my nose. I'd say Florida's like right over there. A little bit better than decent, but not better than above average. Okay? Because again, they kind of weren't. They allowed a higher pressure percentage in 2024 than in 2023, which both of those numbers were higher than the average across the country. They had less yards per carry, but again, I feel like that one you can argue is more on the running backs, whoever that may be. I'm not saying one specifically, but you could argue that one's more on the running backs because their offensive line they were getting less yards after contact. Again, context matters, right? Less yards after contact, but they were also getting less yards per carry. Could argue that one's more on the running backs than the offensive line, but pass protection was an issue, right? I think everybody can agree with that. And I will also say that the offensive line play did get better when Florida started, or more so stopped, rotating on the offensive line to the rate that they did. Turns out continuity and consistency matters there. Who would have thought about that? Crazy. But Florida's offensive line was decent to above average. They will be better in 2025. I feel should be better, I'll say, in 2025. We'll talk about how, why, and in which ways next when we get back on Locked On Gators. We are all about the stats, clearly, because numbers don't lie. They do fudge the truth a little bit sometimes. I'm not going to lie. And when it comes to the all-new Nissan Armada Pro 4X, the numbers are on an MVP level, right? The ability to tow over 8,500 pounds. Powered by a twin-turbo V6 engine. And room for up to 8 people. Get a lot of people. And again, can tow 8,500 pounds. It's a lot of people, right? I think that, especially when we talk about 8 people, you're not going to find that much, right? You could all put all your luggage in there. Not going to find enough to be, oh yeah, they can't do it. Not going to happen. Nope. Take your adventures to new heights in the all-new Nissan Armada Pro 4X. Learn more at nissanusa.com. Just saying. NissanUSA.com. And if you like making money, March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories to them Gators winning the whole damn thing. Which, again, I bet Florida to make the Final Four before the season. That was at plus 1,500. I bet Florida to win the Natty before the season. That was at plus 6,000. If either of those things happen, I profit tremendously. If both of them happen, I profit tremendously. Visit FanDuel.com to get in on the college hoops action all tournament along with FanDuel.com. Thanks for being Locked On Gators, your first listen of the day, every day. We are available daily and free reviews in the podcast and on YouTube. And like I've mentioned, Florida's pass blocking in 2024, little underwhelming, right? They allowed slightly more pressure per drop back, a higher pressure percentage, higher sack percentage, or lower sack percentage than 2023. But again, that's where we talk about the context of who is getting sacked, who is getting pressured, who is dealing with that. Because that is where we have the conversation of which the quarterback, of quarterback play, right? That's where we have that conversation of who is getting pressured. Because in 2023, it was Graham Mertz. And in 2024, it was DJ Lagway. That's where we talk about that difference of who's getting pressured. 2023, Graham Mertz, the sack percentage was 7.46%. 2024, that dropped 5.4%. But again, pressure rate went up. The explanation for that, who was at quarterback? With Anthony Richardson, it was 4.01%. Who's at quarterback is what matters there. It's not about, how often they're getting pressured. It's about how often they're getting sacked. For Florida, you've got to figure out that right tackle spot first. That's the most important thing, right? Because when you look at their returning offensive line, you've got left tackle Austin Barber, left guard Najee Harris, center Jake Slaughter, right guard Damian George, right tackle, question mark, which I will also say this. I truly think that during the season, we will see right guard be split up between Damian George and Rod Kearney. I'm not saying who's starting. I don't care about any of that. Or actually, I'll say this to be even more fair and to not seem like I'm just picking on Damian George. I want the guard spots to be a rotation between Najee Harris, Rod Kearney, and Damian George. I don't care who's starting where, what it is, looks like. Actually, I do care. If you're going to have Najee and Damian George starting, start them at left guard and right guard. If you're having any other combination that involves a guy that started last year, start him at the same spot he started at last year, please. Keep that continuity along the line. But you got to figure out right tackle because you've got to replace Brandon Crenshaw-Dixon, who had a tremendous year. Really, he had a rough Miami game and then every other game after that. Pretty damn good. I'm going to be honest. Like Brandon Crenshaw-Dixon, you can go back. When he came over from San Diego State, I said that I thought he'd be good. I didn't think he'd be that good. Just going to be completely honest with you. He allowed just 12 pressures in 2024. 12. From an offensive tackle in the SEC. 12. That's really freaking good. As far as the NFL prospect, it's a different conversation, right? The athleticism is a major concern for NFL teams, but we're not talking about him as an NFL prospect. We're talking about him as the Florida Gators right tackle. So he's gone. The interior of the line is not a concern for me for a couple reasons, right? One, you've got, and yes, Najee Harris had a rough year. He allowed the most pressures on the team with 17. So Najee Harris had a rough year, but was very young, very inexperienced last year, was kind of trial by fire there. So he should develop fine. Two, he's going to have Austin Barber and Jake Slaughter on his sides, and I trust them. But the interior is something I'm not concerned about, mainly because, again, Najee in year two as a starter, should be very helpful. Jake Slaughter coming back as year three as a starter, year two as the full-time starter, and coming back as a first-team All-American should be pretty damn good. And then if it's Damian George at right guard, that continuity is big. And if it's Rod Kearney at right guard, Rod Kearney balled in his limited snaps. Like Rod Kearney played really freaking good in his limited snaps at right guard in 2024. He was just damn good there. So I do think that for me, it's kind of who's going to be your right tackle. Right now, Bryce Lovett's the leader. It's expected to be a battle between Bryce Lovett and Caden Jones mostly. I don't so much have a preference for who wins. I do think that long-term Caden Jones is the better tackle. But I also think that Bryce Lovett is better suited to guard. But most of that is me thinking of it as the NFL. Like that's the NFL draft analyst in me. Like that's where that comes from. Again, my background is the NFL draft. That's where it comes from. I go, yeah, long term he's going to be a guard, but college you can get away with that. That's why they tell you, hey, in the NFL you're going to play guard. And it's like, okay, well in college I could play tackle, be really good at that. So I'm going to do that. But that continuity on the offensive line should be huge, and it's different continuity, right? From 2022 to 2023, we were like, okay, you're going to have continuity. As in it'll be guys coming back, right? The guys that were on the team, but not guys that were starting fully. And also you had that continuity got kind of shot when Kingsley Aguakin got hurt and Jake Slaughter got thrown into the lineup. Then from 2023 to 2024, it's like, all right, well, we're replacing a few guys. You got three of your 5 returning starters, but Damian George was changing positions. This was the first time that Jake Slaughter was the starting center the entire time. And Austin Barber was unhealthy at the time. Don't forget, last spring, we had to deal with a lot of people talking about Austin Barber not being fully healthy at the time. That was the thing that people kept talking about from 2022. Or, sorry, that was the thing that people kept talking about from 2023 going into 2024. So it wasn't like they were fully healthy working out all together. Here, you've got a much more stable group on your offensive line. You're not having as many competitions there. You're figuring things out. I also will say, I know this isn't necessarily the offensive line, but they go into the protection schemes. Tight end, Hayden Hansen, one of the best pass blocking tight ends, if not the best pass blocking tight end in the country. Jacoby Jackson, Jaden Ball, they both put out pretty damn good film in pass pro. They didn't get a ton of reps there. Part of that was because of how much they rotated. Part of that was because of how much they ran the ball. So they didn't get a ton of reps in pass pro, but what we did see from them was pretty good. It was pretty impressive. Not going to lie there. And you can go back to the earliest days of my time on Locked On Gators. I'm talking about running backs in pass pro. I am. You can go back to my first NFL draft is 2019. I'm talking about running backs in pass pro. Like I care about running backs in pass protection. It was an issue with me and Trevor Etienne long before he announced his departure. Like I remember I was saying it when he was a freshman, and people were like, who cares? He's a freshman. Just give him the ball. Let him run it. Doesn't matter if he could pass block. And then he left and everybody turned on him. My whole thing with Trevor Etienne was always pass pro. And it still is. I want to throw that one out there. But I do think that Florida, you're in a really good spot to have a much improved pass blocking unit. So hopefully that happens. As far as the run game goes, I have some opinions. I have some suggestions. And we'll talk about those when we get back with Locked On Gators. You ever check your bank account and wonder, where in the hell did all my money go? Well, between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's kind of easy to lose track, right? That's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. And Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, right? It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. I don't know about you guys. Like I use different credit cards for different things, depending on the points I get. I'm not going to lie. I know it might be a little silly. Some people might not respect it, but if I'm going to spend the money anyway, like I don't spend things to get the points, but if I'm going to spend the money, I'm going to use the card that at least gets me points, right? I'm maximizing my usage there. Okay. That's what we're doing. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day every day. We are available daily and free reviews of the podcast and on YouTube. And to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Gators, we're talking about the run game and run blocking. And something that I've noted, we'll say, is that every year since Billy Napier got to Gainesville, the Florida Gators run game has added more gap scheme to it. And I say added because it has been additions, right? It's not just like, oh, they're running more gap. They are running more gap run game, but it's also that they're adding to their playbook and expanding upon some things, right? Like at the start, it was a lot of wide zone. That was a lot of what they did, and inside zone as well. But a lot of wide zone was like the big selling point for Billy Napier's offense, right? Since then, they've added more gap game. Since then, football in general has just gone back toward the gap game, right? Like football has always been cyclical. Football has always gone in there. Oh, we're gonna spread everybody out and air it out, and then when defenses adjust to that, we're gonna condense things and run the football, right? I mean, look at the NFL. That's what they're shifting to a lot. Like more teams are going, hey, let's just get some big offensive linemen and just plow through people. Let's just do that. Let's run the ball again. Because that's what's been working right now, because defense is adjusted for the pass game. And then, okay, offense has been, all right, we'll run the ball. So I do think that with Florida, that trend continues. I do think Florida continues to add more gap game and just shift a bit to it. I'm not saying, go mostly gap game. Florida's still more zone blocking than run blocking, or than gap blocking. But I do think that you should continue to shift toward that 50-50 balance, although you'll never get to 50-50 balance. Florida has shown that they will change up their run game based on tendencies and the scheme matchup. Specifically, look at the Kentucky game. They hammered counter. They did. They hammered counter. And they hammered split zone. And then they worked with things where the tight end comes across the formation, which I will say this as well. The practice clips that we've seen with tight ends blocking, we've seen a couple of things that were noteworthy, I think. We saw split zone blocking, and we even had a parent put out a practice clip that was split zone, which is something Florida's always done and should always do. It's one of my favorite run blocking concepts. But split zone is basically, let's say the tight end is on the right side of the offensive line. So he's outside the right tackle. He's outside the right tackle shoulder. Whole offensive line blocks to the right, so toward the tight end. But the tight end then pulls across behind the offensive line. So he doesn't cross the line of scrimmage. Behind the offensive line. And he pulls off and he blocks the backside edge. And then that gives the running back, takes the ball. He's reading right, but he's got whatever lane may be open. And then he's also got the cutback that the tight end is setting up by sealing off that backside end. And so he can cut back and go upfield. So split zone, great concept. Florida ran it. It's awesome. We've seen tight ends working with that. So, or just working on that pull across the formation to the outside. Should see more split zone, or could see more split zone, could see more counter as well, where I know that Florida has run quite a bit of GH counter, which is, again, let's say same situation. The tight end's on the right side of the right tackle. So he's outside the right tackle. You've got both your right guard and your tight end pull across the formation, and they block to the left. And that's your GH counter. Florida has also run GT counter, where it's the guard and the tackle pull. So you've seen that. We could see more of that. Split zone, obviously zone, counter, gap. Could see that. But I do think that part of it is also that Florida has more athletic linemen this year. Like I mentioned earlier, Brandon Crenshaw-Dickson, not a great athlete. That is going to limit some things. Perhaps now this year, with whoever is your right tackle, they should be more athletic than Brandon Crenshaw-Dickson, and they should be able to open up the run game a bit schematically. Benefit there. I also think that, so last year, if you're new here, because the show has grown considerably, which thank you very much for that. During the season, Hayden Hansen was here every week during the year. Every Wednesday, he was here for the past 3 years. And last year, or every year, we talk about run scheme, right? And last year, he mentioned that duo was his favorite scheme to block. And if I'm not mistaken, the reason that he explained it was basically no matter what the defense is showing you up front, you can block duo because it's just a bunch of double teams. And so it's basically no matter what the defense is showing you, you can block a duo, and then the running back makes a decision. Duo is becoming increasingly, I guess we'll say, frequently used across all levels of football. Sean McVay, who was the big wide zone guy 2 years ago, as in the 2023 season, ran more duo than anybody else in the NFL. I don't know the numbers for 2024, but ran more duo than anybody else in the NFL. Had great success running the ball. Florida started bringing it out. Last year, I covered the New York Giants. I know. Pray for me. I covered the New York Giants spring or summer football in session, preseason, whatever you want to call it. Covered that in person. And every running back that I spoke to at that camp said, or at preseason, said, duo is my favorite run concept to run. Because the running back gets so much more control there, right? So running backs love duo, tight ends love duo. Considering the success Florida had running it last year, I would expect to see more of it. Considering the success that Florida had running pin pull, I would expect more of it, especially when you've got a guy like Hayden Hansen there. Pin pull, tight end on the edge of the line. He blocks down and basically seals the edge rusher there. And then you have a couple of offensive linemen pull. It can change. It could be center and tackle, center, guard, center, guard, could all pull. You can do a bunch. You shouldn't do guard, center, guard. That's bad. Any quick 3-tackle, kill that. But the tight end on the edge blocks it down. And if he's on the outside of the right tackle and he blocks down and seals the edge, then the right tackle and the center can both pull and lead block in space. They basically are doing the equivalent of running the alley, but on offense. And the running back gets to follow them. You may remember that from, what was it? 71-yard rushing touchdown from Montreal Johnson against Miami. That was pin pull. So you may remember it from that. Florida did that against Miami, didn't do it again against Miami, didn't do it much the rest of the year. Hopefully, we will see more of it in 2025. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day every day. We are available daily and free reviews in the podcast and on YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Florida Gators football. For Locked On Gators, I'm Brandon Olsen. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Find all my written work with New York Giants on SI, and I will see you all next time.